Hello and welcome to Value Research Helpline. I'm Ruchira and our experts here at Value Research are now all set to answer your queries on investing and personal finance. Joining us is Ashutosh Gupta, who heads the mutual fund research team at Value Research. Welcome, Ashutosh.
Thank you, Ruchira.
Today's first question has been sent in by Anant Garg, who wants to know all about the difference between average maturity and Macaulay duration of a debt fund. Should investment time horizon be matched with average maturity or Macaulay duration for debt funds? He asks.
Okay, so these are relatively technical terms, but let me try and let me try and provide a more simplistic explanation to this. So first is average maturity is nothing but the weighted average maturity of all the bonds in a portfolio. So for example, let's say a portfolio is comprised of two bonds, one maturing in 10 years and another bond maturing in 5 years. And both these bonds have an equal weightage. So they have a 50-50% weightage in a portfolio. So the average maturity of this portfolio would simply be 7.5 years. That's the average of 5 and 10 years. And since both of them have an equal weight, so both of them are assigned a 50% weightage. And that's how you arrive at the average maturity, which is 7.5 years. But a better depiction of duration is through Macaulay duration, which also factors into account the periodic cash flows that accrue from a bond, and not just the total maturity of a bond. Now let me again take an example to explain this. Let's say there is a zero coupon 10-year bond which does not pay any intermittent cash flows. There are no intermittent coupon payments, but it only makes a bullet payment at the time of maturity, which is 10 years down the line. Now, in case of this bond, the maturity and the Macaulay duration would be same, that is 10 years. Now, let's say there is another 10-year duration bond, a bond which matures in 10 years, which is a coupon paying bond, which pays you intermittent coupon, say an annual coupon. Now, in case of this bond, the maturity would still be 10 years, but the Macaulay duration would be slightly lesser than 10 years, taking into account some of the cash flows that come to you before the 10 year. These are the intermittent or the annual coupon payments that come to you. So that's why the Macaulay duration here would be slightly lesser than the 10-year maturity of the bond. So typically the Macaulay duration would be lesser than the average maturity in any bond portfolio. And the magnitude of this difference can differ depending upon the composition of these cash flows from a bond. Now, if you look at the bond fund portfolios, the difference between an average maturity and the Macaulay duration can vary widely between just about a few months to as much as 3 to 4 years. And as I said that, a better depiction of duration is by way of Macaulay duration. So if you want to eliminate the interest rate risk from your portfolio, it is ideal to map your investment duration to the Macaulay duration of a fund, and that's how you can take care of the interest rate risk. But remember that this would typically work only in case of funds which are on a roll down strategy. Now, roll down strategy is a sort of a passive form of investing in debt funds, where a fund manager creates a portfolio with a certain maturity profile in mind. Let's say a portfolio of about 4 years duration, and then he simply buys and holds this portfolio and lets the duration run down naturally from 4 years to 3 years, 2 years, 1 year down to 0. And then he resets the portfolio, makes fresh investments to take the duration back up to 4 years. So in this kind of a roll down strategy, if you map your investment horizon to the Macaulay duration of this portfolio, then effectively you would eliminate the interest rate risk from your investments. So that's how you can make use of Macaulay duration.
All right, now Harry Sidhu says, post the court order, he's expecting a payout of about 10 lakh rupees from the shuttered Franklin funds. Considering the market status, should he invest it in good debt funds or in equity via the SIP route?
Well, that entirely depends upon his investing need and his investing time horizon. So let's say if he's looking to invest this money only for say the next 3 to 4 years, then it is advisable to keep all of this money in high quality debt funds. But in case he has a longer investment horizon, then he can add a measured dose of equity to his portfolio. and progressively as his time period increases to say 8 to 10 years or more, then a bulk of this money can be in equity. Now, which specific instruments to go for between equity and debt? Well, as far as equity is concerned, he can simply go for a couple of good flexi cap funds, which come with a good long-term track record of performance. Now, as far as debt is concerned, he should avoid funds that take aggressive or excessive credit risk by investing in bonds of issuers which have a low credit rating. These kind of funds do offer promising returns, but they can also go horribly wrong when things take a turn for the worse. And nobody understands this better than him. So the idea is for the debt component, he should stick to a few high quality short duration funds, and those should be good enough. And more broadly, I wish him and his other fellow investors in these shuttered Franklin funds speedy realization of the remaining money as well, which is stuck.
That's right. Here's hoping you get back the remaining amount speedily. Now, Amlan Basak asks, what are the advantages and disadvantages of investing in mutual funds in the name of a minor?
The advantage of investing in the name of the minor is that you are able to ring fence a certain allocation from your other investments, and this could be meant for a critical goal like the higher education of the child. So you are able to create a very distinct allocation by investing in the name of the minor itself. Now, the other important aspect to remember is that the ownership of these investments passes on to the minor, to the child, once he or she attains the age of majority. So as I understand the workings of this, once the child attains the age of majority, the account is frozen till the time some documentation is completed to pass on the ownership in terms of the rights to make investments or redemptions from this account to the child. And some people see it as a disadvantage because they believe that the ownership passes on to the child at an age where he or she may not be mature enough. So that's an important consideration for you to consider. The other important aspect is around the capital gains treatment. So till the child is a minor, any capital gains arising out of these investments by way of any sale or purchase that you make in this account, those capital gains would be clubbed with your income and will be deemed as your capital gains and taxed in your hands. But once the child attains the age of majority, any income of or capital gains arising from these investments would be deemed to be the income of the child. So those are the kind of considerations that you need to keep in mind.
Kishan Tantia is a new investor having a portfolio with 5% of his money in equity and 95% in debt. He wants to shift additional 15% from debt to equity. So should he shift it in lump sum, given that his investment horizon is 7 years?
No, he should not do it in lump sum. In fact, one should never commit to equity investing in a lump sum, but rather spread it over a number of months. That's because one never knows when one ends up catching the market at a high, and if there is a sharp correction right after making the investment, it could be very painful, and in some cases might just scare away the investor for the rest of his life from equity investing, which will be far more detrimental. So and this is even more so in case of a conservative investor or a new investor like him, who are not used to the ups and downs of the equity market. So I would suggest him to spread this 15% allocation that he's looking to switch from debt to equity over at least the next 10 to 12 months, and that should be good enough.
The next question has been sent in by 60-year-old Mahendra Yadav, who is likely to get money from the wound-up schemes of Franklin soon. He wishes to reinvest it and start an SWP for use. So which category of debt funds is suitable for SWP in the current scenario? He wants to know.
So first of all, it's quite heartening to see these kind of messages coming from these investors who've started getting back at least a part of their money from the shuttered Franklin funds after a long wait. Now, this episode has caused a great deal of fear, pain, and anxiety, perhaps even more so in case of a senior citizen like himself, who's been looking to depend on this money to derive regular income. So it's a wonderful news, and it's quite heartening to see that the money has finally started hitting the bank accounts of these investors. Now, how to go about it? I'd say that safety first has to be the mantra, and I think he has a first-hand experience of it. Nobody understands that better than he himself. So I'd suggest that he should consider allocating at least a part of this to a senior citizen savings scheme, which if he doesn't mind the lock-in that comes with it, it's a suitable scheme to derive regular income, and the rate of interest is quite attractive in the current context. So that's one. Beyond that, I would say that the money that he's looking to withdraw as a regular income over the next 1 year, he can look to put it in a liquid fund and create an SWP of 12 equal installments to derive income that he wants from this for the next 1 year. And the balance amount can be invested in a couple of very high quality short duration funds. So funds like the IDFC short term fund. And from there, every year, he can transfer the money that he's looking to withdraw as income over the next 1 year in a liquid fund and create an SWP from it, and so on and so forth. So that's the kind of approach that he can follow as far as the debt allocation is concerned. Now, broadly, I don't know, I'm unaware of the scale of his investment or how critical is this money in his context to depend upon for regular income. But generally, for the regular income need, we advise investors to have at least some of their money in equity. So at least 25-30% of their money should be in equity investments to keep up with inflation during long years of retirement. When with the general rise in the prices in the economy, he would need to increase his regular income. But if he continues to depend purely on fixed income alternatives, then he may not be able to increase his income to keep pace with inflation. And for that, a certain allocation to equity is very essential. And this can simply be invested in a Nifty based index fund, and that should be a good enough equity allocation. And for the balance money, which is earmarked for debt allocation, he can opt for a combination of senior citizen savings scheme, the liquid funds, and the short duration funds, as I just explained above.
Saurav Sharma says with increase in his salary, he would like to increase his SIP amount, but his platform doesn't provide the option to increase the amount in his current SIP. So should he cancel the current SIP and start a new one, or start a new SIP while continuing with current SIP? What's better, keeping expense ratio and other factors in mind?
Well, first of all, it's great to know that he's thinking of those lines, because that's what we profess to a lot of investors. But often we see that investors commit to a certain amount for their SIP and then continue with the same amount for several years down the line without any context of what was their income level when they started investing and how their income level has grown versus the stagnancy that has been there in their SIP amount. So it's quite encouraging to see that he's looking to increase his SIP in tandem with his income. Now, to answer his question, first of all, there is really no difference in terms of costs or any associated expenses, whether he invests through a single SIP or multiple SIPs. So from that perspective, that does not make a difference. So what I'd suggest is, if this is really a one-time increment to his SIP that he's looking to make at this point in time, then the simplest and the quickest way could be to just start a fresh SIP. But having said that, if these increments is something that he's looking to make periodically, say every year he's looking to increase his SIP amount along with his income, then adding new SIPs every year may not be a viable approach, because the sheer number of SIPs can become overwhelming to track. So in that case, a top-up facility offered by fund companies would be a better alternative, where one can select a predefined amount of increment, either in rupee terms or percentage terms, to one's existing level of SIP at predefined intervals. And one can also specify the upper limit to the SIP amount beyond which the increments are stopped. So that is a kind of facility that may be of use to him, and he can look out for a platform which provides the top-up facility. An alternate way that many investors follow, which he can consider, is to set up SIPs only for a 1 year period at a point in time. And then towards the end of the year when the SIPs are expiring, it gives the investor a natural opportunity to reflect back on the investments, take stock of them, consider whether funds are doing well or there is merit in looking to change any of the funds. If there is a need to rebalance the investments or rebalance the asset allocation. And while doing that, also decide upon what would be the kind of SIP amount that he would like to keep for the next 1 year, and then create an SIP for the next 1 year of that amount, and then repeat this process the next year. So that's also an approach that one can follow, but one should do that only if one does not fall into procrastination and does not keep sitting upon the SIP renewals. Because if one does that, that could be far more detrimental, because if one delays renewing one's SIPs, then that can come at a great opportunity loss. So I would suggest that if he has these tendencies to procrastinate, then a top-up facility would be a better one for him.
Okay, now Vishal Bansal wants you to elaborate a bit about Smart SIP. Is it better than the normal SIP?
No, we believe that nothing beats the simplicity and the discipline of regular investing that comes with the simple form of SIP investing. Now, every now and then, you come across some of these innovations which come with some twist to the SIP story to make it smarter or make it more sophisticated. And Smart SIP is one of them. So what happens in a Smart SIP is that the amount of money that gets invested in equity every month is somewhat linked to the level of the markets. So it is driven by an algorithm which determines whether the markets are expensive or cheap based upon certain predefined parameters like the level of the market or the valuation of the index and several other parameters. And if the algorithm is of the view that the markets are expensive, then out of your SIP amount, only a part of it is invested in equity, while the rest of it is diverted to a liquid fund instead of an equity fund. And that is broadly the mechanics of how the Smart SIP works. Now let's take a step back and understand how SIPs fit into your equity investing. See, equity investing is generally a bet on the economy. If you believe that 5 to 10 years down the line, the economy would be bigger, the businesses that make up the economy would be bigger, they would be selling more, they would be earning more, then you should be investing in equity. So the equity investing generally mirrors or reflects the growth in an economy. But the problem is that equity markets do not grow as smoothly. If they were to grow smoothly, then one could even invest in lump sum in equity markets and there would not have been a need for an SIP. But time and again, equity markets have a tendency to run ahead of themselves. And at times they run far ahead of themselves and they reach a bubble-like situation. And really that is where the worries lie, that if you end up investing at a time when the markets are in those bubble-like proportions, and if that bubble bursts, then your investments can be subjected to deep corrections, and there could be a deep value erosion that you suffer from. And the journey back to reclaim your original investment value could be long and painful. Leave aside any returns that you make out of it. So the idea is that to be able to benefit from equity markets, one should invest smaller amounts at different market levels rather than investing all the amount at one market level, and do that simply to avoid the possibility of catching a market high when it is nearing its peak. And SIP is a very simple and time-tested solution to be able to do just that. Now, the irony is that with all these innovations that are mounted on top of SIP, all of them have an element of timing the market, which is precisely the devil which SIP is originally supposed to be an antidote to. So the idea is that you should avoid all these innovations and stick to the good old and the simple form of SIP investing. See, the real magic does not happen with these innovations. The real magic happens by investing through the ups and downs of the market, and do that consistently over a long period of time. And during this while, also look to increase your SIP amounts periodically with the increase in your income. and that is something that you should focus more on and stick to the simple form of SIP.
Sumant Sethi says Value Research Premium effectively asks one to switch from regular to direct plans, but doing so may attract large amounts of tax, making it unprofitable. So, what should one do?
So you need to understand that you are anyways incurring a big cost in terms of the additional expense ratio that you are incurring on regular plans. So let me take an example. In case of equities, this differential tends to be 1% per annum. So in case of a rupee 1 crore portfolio, you end up paying rupees 1 lakh extra in costs anyways. So the idea is to do these shifts from regular plans to direct plans over a period of time. Maybe don't do it at one go if you're sitting on sizable accumulated capital gains, but stagger it over a period of time. The idea is that your capital gains up till the start of 2018 are anyways grandfathered, and you can get all the details about the capital gains accruing to you after factoring in the grandfathering through your premium account itself. So compare these capital gains with the kind of extra cost that you are incurring over regular plans, and perhaps that itself gives you a strong nudge to think about shifting to direct plans. And once you've made up your mind, as I said, that don't be in a hurry. Do it over a period of time. Do it gradually. We are closing in on the end of the current financial year, so split your switch between these two financial years so you are able to benefit from the rupees 1 lakh exemption on capital gains, for 2 years. So that's one that you can do. Also look for any opportunities to make these shifts whenever there is a sharp correction in the market, because whenever the market falls, some of these capital gains which are accumulated erode, and that itself could be an opportune time to make some of these shifts. So the broad point is that through our communications and what all you see in your premium account, we will continue to provide you that nudge, and we will continue to remind you that you should make this switch. But that doesn't mean that you have to do it in one day. Take your time, plan it in a more methodical way, but do it. Because if you don't do it, then over long years of your investment journey, say 15 to 20 years, the additional cost that you end up incurring in regular plans uh, can be a far greater burden than the burden of the capital gains tax liability. So think about it on those lines, and hopefully you are able to make up your mind.
All right, Mohammad Abid Hussain asks, what should be the better roadmap for investment if he's a beginner?
So keep it simple. If you can avail tax exemption under Section 80C, simply opt for one or two good ELSS funds and start investing in them through an SIP. Otherwise, if you don't need tax exemption, then you can either simply go for a Nifty index fund, say a UTI Nifty index fund, or maybe opt for one or two good aggressive hybrid funds, for instance, the Mirai Asset Hybrid Equity Fund, and start investing in them through SIP. And you should do that at least for the next 3 years and keep investing with discipline through the ups and downs of the market without paying much heed to the noise around market levels. And once you're able to do that, you would have a better understanding and a better appreciation of how equity investing works and how equity markets behave. And hopefully you would be able to develop a belief in equity investing, and you would gain the confidence to then plan your investing in a more nuanced way from there on. So that's what I would suggest to you to do right now.
Okay, now Om Prakash has been investing in Sundaram Midcap Fund since 2006. Now it is rated as 1 star by Value Research. So should he continue his SIP?
Well, Sundaram Midcap Fund has disappointed. In the recent years, it has trailed, or it has lagged the midcap index as well as a majority of its peers by a wide margin. In fact, if you look at the smaller time periods, then it has had a tendency to fall more than an average peer when the markets fall. But it has not been able to capitalize on the phases of on the phases when the markets rise as much as some of its peers. Uh, so I believe there is a case to look for better alternatives among the mid cap funds, and there are quite a few of them.
Vivek Sharma has sent in the next query. He wants to know if he should invest in a flexi-cap fund or a focused equity fund.
Well, first of all, both of them are meant for a similar investing need, which is to generate wealth, to generate capital appreciation over a long term. And both of them also have a pretty similar universe of stocks from which they create their portfolios. Now, the big difference lies in the number of stocks that they hold. So, in case of focused funds, by mandate, they cannot invest in more than 30 stocks at any given point in time. While in case of flexi cap funds, there is no such restriction. Different funds vary significantly in terms of the number of stocks that they invest in. So you can find certain funds which invest in even lesser than 30 stocks by choice, but then there are other funds which are much more diversified and maintain a portfolio of well over 60 stocks at any given point in time. Now, focus funds tend to be more high conviction and more concentrated strategies, typically made up of a fund manager's best stock ideas, but they also tend to be riskier because of the higher level of concentration. But at the same time, they can also be much more rewarding if the fund manager's calls go right. And in fact, there are fund managers who've exhibited the capability to run a focused strategy fairly well with a high degree of consistency. Uh, so I'd broadly say that if you're looking to invest only in one fund, then avoid a focused fund and instead pick one fund from the flexi cap category, because their higher degree of diversification would be of great value. But in case you're looking to create a portfolio of two, three, or even more funds, then it doesn't really matter whether you go for focused funds or flexi cap funds, because even if you create a portfolio of two, three funds and all of them are focused funds, even then at a overall portfolio level, you would be fairly diversified, at the stock level, and it will not make much of a difference whether these all are focused funds or not. In fact, for that very reason, we don't make a distinction between focus funds and flexi cap funds when we rank the funds or we rate them. So we club the focused variety of equity funds also with our flexi cap category to facilitate better comparisons for investors. So as I just said, that because they serve the same investing need and they effectively compete for the same share of an investor's allocation, we believe that they should be clubbed together to facilitate better comparisons. And that's why we put them all together in one category. So on Value Research Online, if you go to the FlexiCap category, the list would show you the focused as well as the FlexiCap funds all together for you to compare and pick one for yourself.
All right, now Kishore Kumar asks, if his investment horizon is 3 to 4 years, should he park a lump sum amount in gilt funds or long-term debt funds?
Well, gilt funds make sense at the time of falling interest rates because these funds benefit the most when interest rates in the economy are falling. But on the flip side, they also suffer the most when the interest rates start to rise. So from that perspective, they are at best meant for a tactical allocation at the time of falling interest rates, but investors should also exit them when the interest rates start to rise. Now, if you look at their returns over the last 1 and 3 year periods, they look fairly attractive. And that's because we've just been through one such phase of falling interest rates last year. And that's what makes their returns look so good. And that is why investors get attracted to them right now. But I'd suggest investors to also look at their returns in the last 1 month period when the yields on bonds have been rising, and therefore these funds have suffered a lot. In fact, if you compare the returns of bond funds of different categories in the last 1 month, gilt funds happen to be among the worst performers, and some of them have lost well over 1% in a 1 month period. Uh, so that's why the idea is that these funds are meant for a tactical allocation. And the kind of stage which we are at in the economy currently, largely we are past the stage when the interest rates were falling, and broadly there are no more expectations of interest rates to fall more from here on. On the contrary, the RBI, depending upon the macroeconomic factors as they unfold, the RBI may decide to start increasing the interest rates from some time later in the next financial year or the one after that. So from that perspective, this is not an opportune time to invest in gilt funds.
Today's last question has been sent in by Suresh Singh Bisht. Due to rising healthcare cost, he wants to create a healthcare fund for himself in about 15 years' time, in addition to medical insurance. So, how to create one and in what type of mutual funds one can invest is what Suresh wants to know.
So one is having a medical insurance of a sufficiently large amount at all times is of utmost importance, and he should not look at creating this corpus to substitute the need for a medical insurance. That's because even if he creates a sizable corpus, then it will not be possible to speedily replenish it if he ends up drawing down upon it. So in case of an eventuality, if he ends up depleting this corpus significantly in a year because of some illness, then he will not have much left for the next year or the year after that. And that is precisely the kind of contingency for which medical insurance is meant for year after year. So by paying a premium which is a fraction of your total sum of insurance, you get this coverage year after year. So the broad point that I'm trying to make is that at no point should he consider creating this corpus to substitute his medical insurance. That's one. Now, how to go about investing for it? He's mentioned an investment horizon of about 15 years. So the way to invest should not be different from any other long-term goal. So his investments should be predominantly in equity, and he should invest through the SIP mode in a couple of good flexi cap funds, and keep investing through the ups and downs of the market. Now, since this is not a non-negotiable goal, this is not a goal like a child education where you need a certain sum of money at a certain point in time and you cannot postpone it. You don't really have such pressing compulsions in this kind of a goal. So I'd suggest that he can be a little more aggressive with this kind of investment, and he can look to add a little bit of mid cap and small cap allocation to his investments, and keep investing, and that should be good enough.
Well, with that, it's a wrap on this episode of Helpline. Thank you, Ashutosh.
Thank you.
Thank you to all our viewers. You can go to VR Helpline on Value Research Online and send us the questions that are stopping you from investing today. Our team will answer them in the next Q&A session. Bye for now.